Well, greetings to all of you. Good Shabbos, happy Sabbath, Shabbat, Shalom. Today I'd like to continue our journey through Torah, a beautiful word of God. His words are so beautiful. I'd just like to remind us of just a few things, just kind of, I just think sometimes we have to remind ourselves of a few of these basic things. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 19, verse 17, Yeshua said, "Do not think that I came to destroy Torah or the prophets." The words of Torah, the words of the prophets, Messiah did not come to destroy them, but to live them, to fill it up. He's the only one who perfectly lived Torah. He lived it beautifully. He lived it perfectly. He taught it perfectly. He was a beautiful example. For assuredly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not a jot, not a tittle, not a comma, or a punctuation mark will pass from the law by any means until all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches other men that it's okay, you don't have to keep that one anymore, that man or woman will be referred to as least, the least of people when the kingdom of God is here. It doesn't say they're going to be in the kingdom. It doesn't say they aren't. I'm not even addressing that. It just says in the kingdom, if they're there, they'll be referred to as the lowest of people. If they're not there, they'll be referred to as the lowest of people, which is certainly something that's not a goal that we want to achieve. I know Satan's not going to be there, but he will be referred to as low. And so, understanding Yeshua's words, he did not come to destroy Torah. And he wanted to make a point of that. Don't think that's what I am doing. The Apostle Paul repeatedly said, are we making void the law because we're talking about grace? No way. Heaven forbid. That's not what I'm saying. Torah cannot save you. There's nobody can save themselves through keeping of Torah. You know what? And if you learn how to worship God really well and you're the best God worshiper there is, you cannot save yourself by worshiping God the right way. You can chant the right songs. You can sing the right hymns. You can do the right dances. You cannot save yourself through praise by learning how to praise God just right. You can't save yourself that way. You cannot save yourself by keeping Torah just right. You can't save yourself through Bible study. You can't save yourself. Having said that, can you worship God in vain? Yeah, absolutely. God says that we can, and many people do. We can worship God in vain. So, in Nehemiah chapter 13, there was quite a discussion. I'm not going to take the time to turn there right now, but in Nehemiah chapter 13, Ezra was very frustrated because the people had taken to themselves pagan wives. Now, this message isn't about, nationalities or who you can marry or who you can't marry. The point wasn't ethnic. The point that Ezra was making is that by marrying, you're unequally yoked. By marrying pagan wives, in other words, they were going to be blended in with the world where they would lose their identity. They would, not just their identity as a people, but specifically their walk with God. The Torah, the religion, the way, that way as it's referred to. They would be watering it down and learning pagan ways instead of learning to live God's ways. And you just project that forward in time, and we come to the book of Hosea. Hosea chapter 5. Sandwiched between Daniel and Joel. Hosea chapter 5 and verse 3. It says, I know Ephraim, God says, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you commit harlotry, and Israel is defiled. They do not direct their deeds toward turning to their God. Their spirit of harlotry is in their midst. And they do not know Yahweh. It says they don't know me. Down in verse 7, it actually says, they have dealt treacherously with the Eternal. They have begotten pagan children. In other words, they've begotten children that don't even know who they are. That God said, look, I called you. I called you out of Egypt, out of the world. We understand Egypt as a type of the world. And I called you out of Egypt to be my son. Okay, and we jump forward into the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament. And what's it say? You know, no man can come to me, Messiah taught, except the Spirit of the Father draws him. So we have to be called. So we're called in the New Testament period. That's obviously made clear. In the time of the Tanakh, we see it again. We must be called by the Father. And so then he calls us. He begins to teach us his ways so that we would live his way. But he says, they have begotten pagan children, children that don't know me, God said. Now, does that mean because they begot pagan children that didn't know them that they were not actually of the tribe of Zebulun anymore? Or they were not actually of the tribe of Manasseh or Ephraim anymore? Of course not. They are still children of Ephraim. But they're like pagans. They don't know God. They don't know that way anymore. They have blended into the world to such a degree that they lost it. And so Messiah is saying, don't think I came to destroy Torah. See, the thing is, we have this. We have Torah. We have Tanakh. We have the Bible, the Scriptures, the Holy Scriptures. We have the books. We all have the books. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter if you want to point to a church and you say, well, this church, you know, they have the most truth of anyone. And you start looking to that church as the direction towards God, you are on the wrong path. You know, I remember there was a famous religious teacher, you know, and when he died, all those who were scrambling to try to, you know, fill in the void that was left, they said, well, we're going to strive to walk in his shoes. And I was very uncomfortable with that. We can't make a church be the core or the center of what we follow. I'm not a core of truth. I'm a man. I'm a teacher of what is the core of truth. I'm not a master of it. I'm a man. There is no church. There is, you know, you can go to Judaism, you're not going to find it. The only thing that you have that is going to be constantly, you know, the Apostle Paul said that the law, Torah, would point us to Messiah, the aim. That was the goal, the purpose of it. It would point you. It's a goal, okay? You know, like if you're going to go bowling, I like to bowl once in a while. You hear these pins down there, and that's the target, okay? You throw your ball in that direction. I don't always get a strike. I don't always get a spare, you know. Sometimes you miss, right? I mean, we miss, you know. If you play basketball, it doesn't matter what the analogy is. You don't always hit it. But if you don't have that goal, if you don't have that target, you're going to be way, way off, a whole lot further than if you have that goal or the target. And Torah is the Word of God that leads us to the target that is God through Yeshua, HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. That has got to be our center. It's not a church. It's not a church book. It's not a man or a minister. It's not Judaism. It is God's Word. That's it. That's the only thing we have, because every church has a little different view on this or a little different view on that. Every synagogue has a little different take on this. Every synagogue has a little different take on that. So what do we know? How do you know what to do? What do you have The only thing you have is the written Word of God that each of us has. That doesn't change. And so people can discuss back and forth, what does it mean? And that's okay, and that's healthy. As long as that is the source that everybody's going to, even if you don't hit the mark square on, you're going to be a lot more accurate. A lot more accurate. But God said His people had begun to have pagan children. You know, in Luke chapter 24, it talks about the gospel began first to be preached at Jerusalem. You can look it up if you want to write it down. It's verse 47. The gospel first began to be preached at Jerusalem, not Rome. The gospel did not begin from Rome. Okay, Rome is like the world's religion. The world's way is Rome. The truth came out of Jerusalem. That's where the good news began. That's very, very significant. You know, back in Genesis chapter 49, you know, in verse 10, it says, there shall not fail out of Judah to be a lawgiver until Shiloh comes, until the coming of Messiah. There would not fail to be a lawgiver from Judah. Not Ephraim, not Joseph, not Zebulun, but out of Judah. And so the good news first began at Jerusalem, and that's where it was first taught. That's where it was first preached. In Psalm chapter 60, but let's see something. Let's begin to see a pattern here. Psalm 60 and verse 7. God says, Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, and Ephraim. Ephraim is the helmet for my head. Judah is my lawgiver, it says. That's God's word. So Judah is the lawgiver. That's interesting. Let's go to Psalm 108. Psalm 108 and verse 8. Gilead is mine and Manasseh is mine. Looks like a repeat, doesn't it? Ephraim is the helmet for my head. Judah is my lawgiver. Moab is my washpot. Over Edom I will cast my shoe, and over Philistia I will triumph. Who's the lawgiver? Judah. Judah is the lawgiver. And so I'm not going to share with you every time in Scripture where it says Judah is the lawgiver. But there are a lot more times that it says that than just the few that I've read you. So, we are not going to escape the fact that if we are going to follow Torah, if Messiah said, don't think I came to change any of it, that it's going to look Jewish. If Judah is the lawgiver, it's going to look Jewish. You can't escape that. And the truth is, it doesn't actually look Jewish. It actually looks God-ish. It looks like God because God is the one that gave it to them. People are the ones that make the association and call it Jewish, but it's really from God. They are the lawgiver. They are not the one who originates the law. In Romans chapter 2, the Apostle Paul said, well, what advantage then has the Jew? In Romans 2, Romans 3. I don't know why I always do that. I go to chapter 2 and it's not there, and it's there in chapter 3. Next time I go back to chapter 2 looking for it again. It's just like a mental click in there. Romans chapter 3 and verse 1, he says, what advantage then has the Jew? Is there an advantage for a Jew? And he says, yes. Significant, much, or a lot. There's a significant advantage, much. In every way, he says. But why? Chiefly, the biggest reason why of them all is because to them were committed the oracles of God. There would not fail to be a lawgiver out of Judah. So God committed the law into their keeping. I'm going to share something with you, but I want us to have this in our mind because it's important understanding the Scriptures. Now let's go to Romans chapter 9. In Romans 9 and verse 4, he's talking about, in the context, the Apostle Paul is talking about his kinsmen according to the flesh. Verse 4, who are Israelites. They are Israelites. And to them pertains the sonship. You know, that adoption, it's translated, huios, it just means to make to be a son. It's sonship. The literal meaning is sonship. They are sons of God. The Israelites are the sons of God. So he says that's one thing that pertains to them. Also, the glory. They are going to be glorified. Also pertains to them is the covenants. Not just the covenant, the old covenant, but the covenants, plural. The covenants pertain to them. Also, the giving of Torah. That's the gift. Yeah, it was committed into their care. The service of God. The service, in temple. The organization, you'll find that David, not one of the priests, not somebody from the tribe of Levi, but David was the one who set in order how the service would be in the temple. You know, how long your course would be for this priest, and then the next priest would come on, and the Levites, and the service, and the establishing of the calendar, and to blow the new moon to announce the coming of this and that. These things, the services were committed to them. And also the promises, of whom are the fathers, and from whom, according to the flesh, Messiah came. So there's significant advantage. Gospel did not start from Rome. It came from Judah. It started in Jerusalem and went out to the world. And the lawgiver was appointed to be that. It was intended to be that way on purpose. Now let's go back to the words of our rabbi himself, Yeshua. Let's go back to John, in the Gospel of John, chapter 4. In John 4 and verse 20, and Messiah is talking to the woman at the well, and she's commenting here in verse 20, and she says, well, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. And Yeshua said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. People worshiping God and didn't even know God. You don't know God, he was saying. You don't know what you worship. Oh yeah, like she could say, oh yeah, no, we're worshiping God, the same God you worship. But Messiah said, you don't know what you're worshiping. How do you know what you're worshiping then? Well, aren't we worshiping Jesus? And aren't we worshiping God? It's like, how many God and Jesuses are there? Well, there's just one, but there are those who know him and those who do not know him. And so Messiah was saying to this woman, yes, you've been coming to Jerusalem, you even went to the right place, and yes, you worshiped God, but you didn't know who you were worshiping. Can we worship God without knowing who he is? Sometimes people ask me, why is it that I keep going back to the statutes? Why do I keep going back to Torah so much? You know, we're a new covenant church. This is why. So that we know who we're worshiping. God says there's a way to worship him. And I think it's important for us to understand because one thing I know about every one of us, and everybody listening, the one thing I know is that nobody wants to worship God in vain. I believe that. Nobody wants to do that. But God tells us how to avoid it. He's talking to this woman at the well, and he says to her, verse 22, you worship what you don't know. You don't even know what you're worshiping. He says, we know what we worship. we, meaning Jews. He was a Jew, and he said we Jews know what we worship. How? He says, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and the word is plural, not the Jew, just Messiah. Of course, he is the great one, and no disputing that. But it's not only restricted to a reference to Yeshua alone. He says, the hour is coming, and now is, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Instead of worshiping without truth, true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth, because the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So what has happened? What has happened to truth? How do we know God? Let's draw back a little bit into the book of 1 John. 1 John chapter 2. Back in the Brit Hadashah here, the New Testament. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 3. He says, by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, oh, I know him. Oh, I know God. Are you referring to Jesus? Oh, I know Jesus. He's the one who died for my sins. Great. I know God. Talking about the God of Israel. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're talking about the same God. Yeah, I know God. Do you keep the commandments? Yes. Which ones? Well, most the ones I think I want to keep I still keep. I mean, I keep the 10, but let's see, our church teaches us to tithing is still a good one. We still do that one. Our church teaches us to keep tithing because, they need an income stream, so certainly they're going to keep that. Let's see, our church teaches us that we shouldn't have witchcraft, so we keep that one. So yeah, I keep the commandments. I'll keep going. Let me ask you this, which commandments do you not keep? Well, the ones that are done away. We don't keep those anymore. Like we don't do sacrifices. Well, yeah, I agree. We don't do sacrifices because Yeshua is the sacrifice once and for all, so all have been cleansed. But so other than the sacrificial ones you keep, well, no. I mean, the old stuff is done away. Well, then why would you still keep the statute of tithing? Why would you still keep the statute of clean and unclean meats? Why would somebody say, I'm not going to eat a pig, because that's a statute, but I'm not going to wear tassels. I'm not going to push them on my doorpost. I'm not going to do or look or act like a Jew. You see, if we think about it logically, it's healthy. It helps us to kind of come to grips with the rationalism of our practice, our faith, our religion, if you will. Is it being done in spirit and in truth? It's a question, you see, that I should ask myself and you should ask yourself, because he who says he knows me and doesn't keep the commandments doesn't actually know me, God says. And that's how we know him. So what it is he said, God said, the Jews are responsible to deliver Torah, to be the lawgiver. And so there's no way to study God's word in honesty without it looking kind of Jewish. Just trying to bring that point out. Do Jews have all the answers? Absolutely not. This word has all the answers. But if we actually do what this word says, and since the Jews are the ones that preserved it and are primarily the followers of it, look what happened when the tribe of Israel was divided from 12 under the leadership of King David and Solomon. Then there was the tribe of Judah, and they said, what did Judah say? They said, well, we're going to stay, even though this Solomon's son here is, he said, well, if my father's finger was thick, I'll try my wrist. Yeah, but still, got temple, got the services of God in Jerusalem, we got temple, we got Torah. I got to stay where Torah is. I have to stay with the service of God, and that's what they did. And so we had Judah, you had the little tribe of Benjamin, and a half tribe of Levi to keep the services, to keep Torah, and to keep teaching, and to keep that way. And what happened to the others? They went in and started keeping a holiday on the 8th month, which is the holiday that became Halloween, was first kept by the king of Israel. And that is what they chose to do, and they became pagan children. They became pagan children because they walked away from Torah. So when we think of Torah, it means everything from Genesis through the last word of Deuteronomy in the strictest sense, and beyond that it really means the word of God, because that's literally what it means. All of the words of God. It's the words of God that says, if you kill an animal, if it's a clean animal, bury the blood. Is that Jewish? You bet. Why is it Jewish? Because God told them what to do. See, they got their identity from God. That's what made them a peculiar people. And that has been lost to others. So in 1 John chapter 2, in verse 4, he says, if anybody says, I know him, and doesn't keep his commandments, he's a liar. He doesn't have the truth. It's important for us to hold on to Torah. Each word, man lives by every word of God, not just bits and pieces of it, the parts we choose. Whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him, and by this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought to walk as just like Yeshua walked. You can go back to the Gospel of John and you'll see the same thing. I'm in 1 John now. You go back to John chapter 14 and verse 15. Again, it talks about keeping the commandments of God is what matters. That's how we know that we know him, when we keep his commandments. If we're not keeping his commandments, if there are certain commandments we just choose not to keep, that can be a shibboleth. It can be a sign the Torah is not written on your heart. Because the new covenant, converted saints, the new covenant followers or believers, have Torah written on their heart. That is a sign of the new covenant. Let's go to Titus chapter 1. Let's listen to something the Apostle Paul here had to say. Titus chapter 1. I intended to get into the book of Exodus today, and hopefully I will. But hey, if I run out of time just making this point, that's okay. Well, let's go to Titus chapter 1. And verse 16. Apostle Paul says, they profess to know God, but in works they deny him, being disobedient and disqualified. Disobedient. So you can profess to know God, and you say, yeah, I know Jesus. I know God. Just like the woman at the well did. We worship God. We've been worshiping here for a long time, and you come along and you say this and that, and, give me some water. But God said, you don't even know who you worship. Wow. Let's go to Luke chapter 6. While we're turning there, I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul. You know, when he said in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, Paul said, circumcision avails nothing. Uncircumcision avails nothing. Keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Do we actually do what God says? And if so, what? What is it that we do? Whatever God says, or what we agree with, what we're comfortable with? That's the question I'm asking us to ask ourselves. Luke chapter 6. And verse 43. Luke 6 and verse 43, he says, a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. I was talking to my friend Fred here the other day, and I mentioned to him that I discovered I had a wild apple tree on my property, and because I'd seen that tree a few times before, but it was overgrown by so many bushes and blackberry vines and, I don't know, just big bushes. I mean, like bushes that are 14 feet tall, you know. But all of a sudden, this one little tree in there had these white blossoms on it. I thought that was kind of cute. And then a little while later, I was sitting out there again, and I noticed an apple hanging where the blossoms used to be. And I realized that is an apple tree there. I got an apple tree. The reason I know for sure it's an apple tree is because by the fruit. By their fruit you will know. This is what Messiah is saying. Every tree is known by its fruit. The fruit we produce, the way we live our life. And so he says, every tree is known by its own fruit. Men don't gather figs from thorns. They don't gather grapes from a bramble bush. A good man out of his good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man brings evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. But why do you call me, oh, master and master, he says. Why do you call me master and don't do the things which I say? So you can say I'm your master, but if you're not doing what I say, I'm not actually your master, he said. That's what he's really saying. Then he says, whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, hears them and actually does them, he's like a man who builds his house on a rock. But the one who heard them but didn't do them, he's like a man building his house on the sand. There's a little bit more to that in the account in Matthew chapter 7. We'll go there in Matthew chapter 7 and in verse 20. Again, in the same context, he says there, by their fruits you will know them. And then he says again, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, Master, Master, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, wow, that's a little more potent than the way Luke put it. Not everybody who says, oh, Lord, Lord, oh, Jesus, Jesus, is going to be in the kingdom of heaven. It takes more than that. So he goes on, he says, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, hey, we prophesied in your name, I taught in your name, I cast out demons in your name, I did a lot of things in your name. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. You were lawless. You didn't actually do what I said. You were lawless. He actually says, in vain you worship me. teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Now, you know what that says? I mean, it says that in Mark 7. It says that in Luke. The thing is, that statement means more than just what's on the surface. In vain you worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men, means when your doctrinal practices and worship is according to the commandments of men instead of God, that worship is in vain. That's what makes your worship in vain. So, if we don't keep Torah as our center, as our guide, and all of the words of God, we very easily could be worshiping God in vain. Very, very easily. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 10, an old passage that, I've heard people read this and they refer to it as a Christmas tree, talking about the Christmas tree. Well, it's applicable to a Christmas tree. It was really about an idol that was being built and decorated. It applies to a Christmas tree. It applies to an idol. I don't care if you think about it as a Christmas tree or not. I think that if that's the only vision you get in your mind, then you're missing it. I think you're missing a big part of it. That's just my opinion. But let's look at Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1 fresh here. It says, "Hear the word which the Eternal speaks to you, O house of Israel." Not just Judah. "Thus says the Eternal, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Don't be dismayed at the signs of heaven." The Gentiles are dismayed by the signs of the heavens. Oh, well, the stars are lined up, and what's your sign, in astrology or what have you. "The customs of the people are futile." Oh, one cuts a tree, and they do this or they do that, and it's part of... Don't learn the way of the Gentiles. You go back where that's rooted from is in Daniel chapter 12. Or excuse me, I meant to say Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 30. Look at it here. Deuteronomy 12 and verse 30. It says, "Take heed to yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, well, how did these nations serve their gods? I'll do likewise. I'll serve the true God, Yahweh, the way those nations served their gods. That's what I'll do. I'll just apply the things they did to our God. That's what I'll do." But the Eternal says, verse 31, "You shall not worship Yahweh your God in that way." Don't worship the Eternal the way the Gentiles worship their gods. Don't try to adapt one religion over. "Be careful to observe what I say. Don't add or take away from it." Verse 32. Now, having kind of just shared with you a little bit, I wanted to kind of begin our message now, really, back in Psalms again. This time, Psalms 78. So let's go to Psalm 78. And if somebody would get me that drink that I left over there, that would be really fantastic. Thank you very much. Psalm 78. It says, "Give ear, O my people, to my Torah. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth, and I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and we have known. And our fathers have told us about these. We will not hide them from our children. We will not hide them from their children, from the children, their children, meaning our fathers' children, which would be us, and our grandkids." That's what he's saying. We will not hide these things. telling the generation to come of the praises of Yahweh. To come the praises of Yahweh and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done. He established it as a testimony in Jacob. He appointed Torah in Israel, which our fathers He commanded, that they should make them known to their children, and so that the generation to come might know, so that the children who would be born, that they would arise and declare it to their children, and so that they would set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. I'd like to ask you, it used to be, I've been thinking about this subject is something I'm going to revive or present again, because it's a subject matter that had been presented quite heavily over the years. But a new generation has arisen since then, a generation that has not heard much about it, and that is the identity of the modern tribes of Israel today. Where are the lost 12, the lost sheep? Well, we have the lost 10 tribes. We know where the Judah is. Well, of course, not all of them, but we understand we have the tribe of Judah and half tribe of Levi and Benjamin. Okay, we have the nation of Israel, but there are more Jews in New York than there is in Clear still to this day. But we understand where the Jews are for the most part, because they kept Shabbat, they've kept Torah, they have continued to be a lawgiver. But I ask you to consider, do you consider yourself, do you know if you have the blood of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in you? Not just you. And if you don't, do you know that you are grafted in among those who do, to be part of the same root, the same tree? Do you know that? The same tree. I guess what I'm getting at is this. The word is, in this psalm, he's saying, remember, so that tell them what your fathers did. You go to the book of 1 Corinthians, and here Paul is talking to the church of Corinth, not talking to a bunch of Hebrews. Maybe there are a few among them, sure, but talking to the Gentiles there. And what did he say? Remember what our fathers. He wanted them to take ownership as part of their heritage, because they were sons just as much as somebody from the tribe of Zebulun would be. Just the same. I guess what I'm trying to point out is that a lot of times we think to ourselves, and I've seen this, and it's been a thing that I marveled at. Not like it's marvelous, but something amazing. How could people say, oh yeah, do you know we are the lost tribe of Israel, and this nation, we're Ephraim, and this is Manasseh is primarily the United States, and Ephraim, the British Commonwealth, and people have said these things and have believed it and internalized it and talked about it their whole life. But they don't want to be Jewish. What do I mean by that? Well, they don't feel comfortable necessarily just because they might realize intellectually, but that hasn't happened in here. And it has to move from here to here. Whether you're grafted in or not is irrelevant. This is what makes the difference between taking Torah on your heart or not. When you realize what God is saying. Let's just continue where we were in Psalm 78. That they would set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments, that they wouldn't be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation. A generation that didn't set its heart aright, whose spirit was not faithful to God. Now, who's he talking about? Whose spirit was not faithful to God? The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They didn't keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in His Torah. They forgot His works. They forgot the wonders that He had shown them. So as we read through the rest of this psalm, if you think that perhaps you might be an Ephraimite or of the tribe of Manasseh, realize this is talking to you personally, specifically. Marvelous things He did in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea. He caused them to pass through. Who? Who did He divide the sea for? He divided the sea for the Ephraimites. That's what He's talking about. The Ephraim is like they've begotten pagan children. They don't remember their roots, where they came from. God parted the sea for you, Ephraim. He slew Pharaoh for you, Manasseh. Not just for the Jew, for Ephraim. And we say, yeah, do you know where the modern tribes of Israel are? The United States and Britain and Canada and Australia. God parted the sea for you. He wants you to remember your roots, where you came from, when God started to call you and have a relationship with you. Not them. And so Paul said to the church at Corinth that were not primarily Jews, he said, our fathers. God parted the sea for us, for our fathers, our family. Personal. Marvelous things He did in the land of Egypt. He divided the sea, He caused them to pass through, He made the water stand up like a heap, verse 13. In the daytime He led them with a cloud, and at night the light of a fire. He did that for our forefathers. He did that for our people. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drinks from abundance, like the depths. He brought streams out of the rock for us. He caused waters to run down like rivers, but they sinned even more against Him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness, and they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke and they said, well, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? So they got a little sarcastic. And so He struck the rock so that waters gushed out and streams overflowed. And He gave bread for you to eat, Ephraim. He gave bread, Manasseh. He fed you with bread, Manasseh. And the Eternal heard, and He was furious. And so a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger came up against Israel, because they didn't believe in God and didn't trust in His Yeshua, His salvation. And yet He had commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven and rained down manna on them, on the Ephraimites. Who is Ephraim today? Ephraim, do you hear? Men ate angels' food, verse 25. He sent them food to the full, and He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens. And by His power He brought the south wind, and He rained meat on them like dust, feathered fowl like the sand of the sea. He led the Ephraimites and the children of Joseph. He let them fall in the midst of their camp all around their habitations. And so they ate, and they were filled, and He gave them their own desire. They were not deprived of their cravings, and while the food was still in their mouths, the wrath of God came against them. He slew the stoutest of our forefathers. He struck down the choice men of Israel. In spite of this, they still sinned, and they didn't believe His wondrous works. Therefore, in their days he consumed in futility, and their years in fear. And when he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and sought him diligently. They remembered that God was their rock, the Most High was their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they flattered him with their mouth. They said, "Oh yes, Lord, Lord." But it was just talk. They lied to him with their tongue. Their heart was not steadfast. They were not faithful in his covenant. But he was full of compassion, and he forgave their lawlessness. He didn't destroy. Yes, many a times he turned away his anger, and he didn't stir up all his wrath. He remembered that they were but flesh, a breath that passes away and doesn't come again. How often they provoked him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert, our forefathers. Yes, again and again they tempted and limited the Holy One of Israel and didn't remember his power, the day when he redeemed them from the enemy and when he worked signs in Egypt. Remember when our grandfathers were in Egypt? He turned their rivers into blood and their streams that they could not drink. He sent swarms of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs. Verse 51, he destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt, the first of their strength of the tents of Ham. The Egyptians are Hamitic. But he made his own people go forth like sheep, and he guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them on in safety so that they didn't fear. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to his holy border. He brought Ephraim and Manasseh, the mountain which his right hand had acquired. He drove out the nations before them and allotted them an inheritance by survey and made the tribes of Israel dwell in their tents. Yet they tested and provoked the Most High and didn't keep his testimonies, but they turned back and acted unfaithfully like their fathers. They provoked him to anger with their high places. God heard and he was furious. And so he forsook the tabernacle at Shiloh, the tent which he had placed among them. And he delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hands, and they were scattered. Also he gave his peoples over to the sword, and he was furious with his inheritance. Fire consumed their young, and their maidens were not given in marriage, and the priests fell by the sword. This is verse 67. It says, moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but God chose the tribe of Judah. Mount Zion, which he loved. He built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth which he established forever. Also, he chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes that he had. And what did he do this for? He chose the tribe of Judah and David to shepherd Jacob, his people, to shepherd Israel, his inheritance, verse 71. And so he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. When we read through those passages, do we think of them or do we think of our fathers and take ownership? Our fathers. See, when Yeshua said, you don't even know what you worship. And in vain they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. It means something. It absolutely means something. Romans chapter 11. In verse 13, the Apostle Paul says, I speak to you Gentiles. insomuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. Romans 11, verse 13. I magnify my ministry, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are of my flesh, and save some of them. For if their being cast away is the reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? For if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, some does not mean all, by the way. If some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them, it's repeated a second time, with them you became partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. You cannot read a passage like that and not understand, at least how do you? That is our root. We are a Hebrew-rooted congregation for precisely this reason. So that we won't be pagan children. We go back to Torah time and again because that is the standard. That is the doctrine. That's how you know God. Those who say they know Him but don't follow Torah, they don't know Him. God says, you don't even know what you worship. How do you know what you worship? Well, you have to keep the commandments to know God, and it's the same thing in return. God says, I know you. But to the others, He says, you're lawless. I don't even know you. Of course, we are a Hebrew-rooted congregation. How can it be anything else? That's the tree that we're grafted into. The lawgiver came out of Judah, of course. That's why Paul said they had that advantage. The services of God were committed to them. But it has been a custom of Ephraim's. It has been a custom of Ephraim's from ancient times to reject Torah. And still to this day is a custom of Ephraim's to reject Torah, to find ways to wiggle out of it. Well, Jesus did away with it. We don't do that old stuff anymore. In Ephraim and Manasseh and the United States and Canada and the peoples, even down into the Church of God, are still acting like they don't, like pagan children. They don't know. And so we keep going back to Torah, and sometimes people say, well, you practice in Judaism. I'll tell you what. You know what? I'm not practicing Judaism, and I don't believe in Judaism, unless by that you mean biblical Judaism, which I do follow that. Rabbinical Judaism, for example, teaches that, how many times? It says 3 times in Torah. It says, you shall not see the kid in its mother's milk. You shall not boil a goat in its mother's milk. From Rabbinical Judaism says, therefore you don't mix meat and cheese. That's Rabbinical Judaism. Where is that? Exodus 23. I'll just share with you, just briefly. Exodus chapter 23. Yes, Exodus 23 and verse 19. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Let's go back to Genesis 18. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 8. Well, let's look at verse 7. Abraham ran. Remember, the Eternal said, shall we keep this thing from Abraham, all that we're going to do? So The angels said, well, let's go down and tell Abraham all that we're about to do, concerning Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot and all of that. So verse 7, Abraham ran to the herd. He took a tender and a good calf, and he gave it to a young man, and he hastened them to prepare it. And so then he took butter and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the trees, and they ate. That is biblical Judaism. That's what I follow. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Abraham ate cheese and meat together. It doesn't say not to eat milk and meat. It says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. That was a pagan custom. And it was kind of disgusting. God said, don't do that. Biblical Judaism. Judaism nonetheless, because the law was preserved by the Jews. It's the root and the fatness of the tree that we're all part of. But Ephraim has had a history of rejecting Torah. And being a pagan child means not that you're evil, or it just means you don't know, you don't even know what you worship. And God said He didn't want that. He wants us to learn to worship Him in spirit and in truth. It's time for Ephraim to wake up. Tassels are not intended for the Jews. They belong to Ephraim and Manasseh and Zebulun. They are a gift to everybody. It's just a symbol of a promise. It's a piece of string. It's just a promise. It's symbolic. There will be healings in the wings of the great rabbi. It's for Ephraim to consider. It's for Manasseh to wake up. It's for all of us who understand where the 12 tribes of Israel have been scattered to stop thinking about them, and start thinking us, me. That's me. And are you grafted into the tree? Then they are our fathers. They are our customs. They are our practices. And Judah means God praiser. They know how to praise God. And so why are we making changes? And some of the service that we have, the basic teaching's basically the same. Because they have established a pattern. David established a pattern. Ezra established a pattern of praise and singing and chanting and worship. And we are very imperfectly trying our best to copy that model. And if it seems strange to us, it's because it's strange to us. But it is our heritage, and we're trying our best to recapture it. It belongs to all of us. We can worship God in vain. The only way to really have truth is to keep going back and visiting Torah. And remember, Yeshua is the living Torah. He is the Word. And He said, don't think I came to destroy not even a word, not a jot, not a tittle of Torah. And He told the woman it was Him, it was Yeshua, our great Savior, our captain, who said, we Jews know what we worship. Of course we are Hebrew rooted. Because that's the way God called us to be.